You know, I think we all tend to just trust the
Oh,
science.
absolutely. Yeah.
Like, for most of us, there's this built-in unstated assumption that the academic world is this ultimate pure meritocracy.
Yeah.
You just assume that researchers do their experiments, they write up their findings, and then the absolute best, most innovative ideas naturally bubble up to the top.
Right. Based entirely on their own merit. It is a very comforting idea.
It really is.
Because we're basically conditioned to believe that the cream always rises to the top, completely untainted by, office politics or networking or favoritism.
Yeah, exactly.
We desperately want to believe that the knowledge shaping our world, our workplaces, and our society is filtered through this entirely objective lens where only the truth matters.
But what if that system is actually rigged? And I don't mean rigged by some like cartoon villain with a secret agenda. I mean, rigged by structural design.
Right. Baked into the system itself.
Exactly. So today we are pulling from a fascinating new research article by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover.
Uh-huh.
It's called The Ivory Tower's Gatekeepers: Systemic Inequality in Academic Publishing.
And it is just an incredibly thorough piece of work. I mean, Dr. Westover takes a hard, data-driven look at 60 years of publication history.
60 years.
Yeah, specifically focusing on management and organizational research to uncover exactly how this academic publishing system operates under the hood.
So our mission for this deep dive is to explore how a very narrow scientific elite essentially controls the flow of human knowledge. We're going to look at why current diversity initiatives are completely failing to fix this problem, and most importantly, what can actually be done to pry those gates open.
Yeah, there is a lot to get through.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Hmm.
Just how hard is it to get published in these top-tier journals today? I mean, I think most people assume it's tough, but the numbers in this paper are just staggering.
They really are. To understand the bottleneck, you really have to look at the sheer scarcity of available space within these publications.
Right.
So Dr. Westover's research focuses on fields like industrial organizational psychology, general management, and human resources. If we look at a flagship publication like the Journal of Applied Psychology, back in 1970, their rejection rate was 73%.
Which is already high.
Right. By any normal standard, that is highly competitive. But by 2024, that rejection rate skyrocketed to 94%.
Wait, 94%?
So 94%.
That is wild. That means out of every 100 papers submitted by incredibly smart, highly educated people who have spent months, maybe years on a study, 94 are just told to go away.
Exactly. And we have to look at the mechanics of what going away actually entails. It is not a quick rejection.
Oh, really?
No. At the Journal of Management Studies, the average time from submitting a paper to actually getting it accepted is 543 days.
A year and a half.
A year and a half of waiting, revising, dealing with multiple rounds of peer review, addressing reviewer critiques, sometimes having to run entirely new data sets,
Oh, man.
and just navigating this incredibly grueling bureaucratic process.
Honestly, listening to the mechanics of that timeline, modern academic publishing sounds exactly like an exclusive velvet rope nightclub.
That's a good way to put it.
Like, you've got this 500-day line stretching around the block, and the bouncers at the door, the journal editors, keep telling everyone standing in the freezing rain, hey, we only let in the absolute best answers.
Right.
But when you look inside the club, it turns out they mostly just let in the people they already know.
What's fascinating here is how the people running the system justify that velvet rope. Journal editors frequently point to those 94% rejection rates and those endless review cycles as like definitive proof of their rigor and quality.
Oh, so they brag about it.
Exactly. They frame the bottleneck as a pure meritocratic filter. But in reality, just surviving a 543-day review process requires something Dr. Westover calls accumulated advantages.
Meaning you need the time, the money, and the institutional backing just to stand in that line without starving?
That is the core issue. Think about the daily reality of two different researchers. If a researcher is at an elite university with a massive endowment, they likely have a huge budget, armies of graduate students to handle the busy work, and a really light teaching load.
Maybe like one seminar a semester.
Exactly. So they can easily afford to endure a year-and-a-half-long review process. But a researcher at a smaller, less prestigious institution might be teaching 4 or 5 classes a semester while trying to do this research with zero funding.
Wow.
They literally cannot afford to survive that weight. The system heavily filters for researchers who already possess the most resources.
Which brings up a glaring question for me. If the nightclub is this hard to get into, who is actually on the VIP list?
Mm.
And why haven't all the recent efforts to diversify this club worked?
Because it feels like, every major academic institution and professional body has some sort of diversity program now. They do, and the paper acknowledges that. Major bodies like the American Psychological Association and the Academy of Management have launched very public, very well-intentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives aimed at diversifying authorship.
Right.
But the data shows a totally different reality. Top journals are still dominated by elite institutions and a few dominant geographic regions.
Wait, I have to push back on that slightly. Shouldn't increasing variety naturally fix the disparity over time? I mean, if these organizations are actively working to change the demographics of the room and bring in people from underrepresented backgrounds, doesn't the power dynamic naturally shift as a result?
It seems logical, sure. But Dr. Westover's research highlights a crucial conceptual difference that explains why that assumption fails in academia. It is the difference between variety and disparity.
Okay, break that down for me.
Current initiatives focus almost entirely on variety. That means bringing in different demographic backgrounds or geographic locations. They are adding different kinds of people to the room. But the real issue driving the system is disparity, which is the unequal distribution of valued resources, prestige, and institutional power.
Ah, I see. So changing the look of the room doesn't actually change who is holding the microphone or writing the rules.
Precisely. Adding variety at the margins of a system does nothing to dismantle the underlying hierarchy of that system. The power remains concentrated because of how prestige is hoarded, and this dynamic forces newcomers into a phenomenon the paper calls epistemic mimicry.
Epistemic mimicry, let's look at that. Epistemic relates to knowledge, and mimicry is copying. So are newcomers basically forced to copy the elites just to get published?
The mechanics of it are quite insidious, yeah. When outsiders from underrepresented backgrounds or non-elite institutions do finally manage to get past the velvet rope, they quickly learn that their inclusion is highly conditional.
Meaning they have to play by the old rules.
Exactly. They face immense pressure to conform to the dominant norms, the established theories, and the acceptable methodologies of the elites already inside.
So no rocking the boat.
None at all. If they use a novel framework or a critical perspective that challenges the status quo, they just get rejected. They have to mimic the paradigms of the people in power to be deemed legitimate.
So the journals can put out press releases saying, look, our authors are so diverse now, but the actual ideas being published are exactly the same safe, traditional paradigms they've been publishing for the last 60 years.
And that is the paradox. Representational inclusion can actually end up legitimizing the inequality. It creates this comforting illusion of fairness, while the underlying engine of disparity just keeps churning out the exact same dominant perspectives.
Which makes me wonder how this small elite actually manages to hoard all this prestige in the first place. Dr. Westover points out that there are structural engines running the system behind the scenes. So let's look at the life cycle of an elite researcher to see how this works. It seems to start from the very beginning of their career.
It does. The first structural mechanism is cumulative advantage, which is often referred to in sociology as the Matthew effect. Simply put, early success breeds more success, creating a massive snowball effect over a career.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the Matthew effect is basically the exact same concept as a viral video algorithm on social media.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Like if you post a video and it happens to get a bunch of views in the first hour, the algorithm says, oh, people are looking at this, it must be good, and then pushes it to millions of other feeds. The early views guarantee future views, completely independent of whether the video is actually any good or not. The rich just get richer.
The parallel is very strong. In the academic world, a 2019 study by Lead and colleagues demonstrated that junior researchers who managed to co-author a paper early on with top scientists gain massive, sustained career advantages over peers who have the exact same qualifications. They get that algorithmic boost, so to speak. And it gets even more extreme. A 2024 study by Brigard found that simply having a famous author's name on a paper significantly increases its citations, regardless of the paper's actual quality.
But why does that happen? Are other scientists supposed to be reading the papers critically?
They are, but reviewers and readers are human, right? And they are completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of literature. When they see a prominent name, a halo effect occurs. The prestige of the name artificially inflates the perceived value and trustworthiness of the work.
So the early advantage gets locked in. Now, as these researchers move into their mid-careers, they become what the paper calls hyper-prolific authors. people publishing an unbelievable number of papers. How do they physically produce so much?
Well, they do it through the second mechanism, which is network closure. When you look at the data on hyper-prolific authors, you quickly realize they aren't isolated geniuses working alone in a cabin somewhere. Extreme productivity is relationally produced. These elites embed themselves in dense, persistent collaboration networks.
Like a private club within the club.
Exactly. They share vast data sets, they divide up the labor of writing and analysis, they streamline coordination, and most importantly, they tightly restrict access to these resources.
So if you aren't in the club, you're locked out of the data.
Completely. If you are outside the network, you don't get access to the data pipeline or the co-authorship opportunities that make rapid, continuous publication possible.
And I imagine once these hyper-prolific authors reach the senior stages of their careers, the dynamic shifts again. Because eventually those authors become the journal editors and the peer reviewers, right?
Right.
They transition from being the people submitting the papers to being the gatekeepers judging everyone else.
Yeah, that brings us to the final mechanism, gatekeeping power. This tiny network of established elites begins to dictate what is actually deemed publishable. Sociologists refer to this as the formation of invisible colleges.
But wait, I thought journal submissions were usually double-blind, meaning the peer reviewer doesn't know who wrote the paper and the author doesn't know who is reviewing it. Isn't that designed to prevent exactly this kind of bias?
You would certainly hope so, but a recent study by Huber and colleagues analyzed this process and found that even in double-blind reviews, author prominence still leaks through and affects the outcome.
How does that even happen if the names are stripped off the document?
Because academic fields, especially at the elite level, are quite small. Reviewers can often guess who wrote a paper based on the highly specific data sets being used, the self-citations, or even just the writing style and theoretical framing.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, Huber's study showed that papers originating from prestigious institutions still managed to receive favorable treatment despite the blinding process. And perhaps more concerning, these gatekeepers actively reject methodological or theoretical deviations from their own norms.
So they punish anything different.
Exactly. They label completely valid alternative perspectives as methodological errors.
So the entire system operates as a closed loop. The elites co-author with each other to build early momentum. They hoard data within their closed networks to publish constantly. And then they act as reviewers to protect their turf and reject anyone who tries to change the rules of the game.
That sums it up perfectly.
If you're listening to this and wondering why you should care about academic inside baseball, think about it this way. These are the people researching how we work, how we manage teams, how we structure our economies, and how we build organizations. If they're prioritizing safe, boring, repetitive research just to stay in the club, we are all missing out on groundbreaking ideas that could literally change how we live.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it fundamentally erodes the public's trust in the meritocracy of science itself.
Yeah, I can see why.
When the wider world begins to see that academic success depends more on a researcher's network position than their actual intellectual contribution, the entire foundation of academic work begins to crumble. This system creates a culture that researcher Hugh Wilmot calls journalist fetishism.
Journalist fetishism. Wow. I'm guessing that means universities and hiring committees care way more about the brand name of the journal on a researcher's resume than the actual words printed inside the article.
Exactly. The place of publication literally becomes a proxy for scholarly worth. Nobody has the time to read the actual papers during a hiring committee meeting, so they just look at the journal rankings.
That is so broken.
It creates superstar-driven distortions where the elites regulate the entire scientific agenda. For the rest of society, it means alternative perspectives and disruptive innovations are constantly marginalized because they just don't fit the mold of what the top journals want.
And the human cost of this has to be brutal. The paper talks about the toll this environment takes on early career academics who are just trying to get a foothold.
The pressure causes chronic stress and rampant burnout. The current incentive structure dictates that the only way to survive is to produce safe incremental research. Taking a genuine intellectual risk is heavily punished by the system.
Which kills innovation.
It really does. And we have to recognize the massive resource inequality driving this stress. A 2022 study by Zhang found that faculty at elite universities aren't inherently more capable or smarter than those at non-elite schools. They simply have massive labor advantages that allow them to play the game more effectively.
Right, going back to what we discussed earlier, the lower teaching loads, the bigger research budgets, the armies of doctoral students, it's a completely uneven playing field. Listening to all of this, it really does sound like an inescapable doom loop.
It can feel that way.
But Dr. Westover's research doesn't just point out the flaws and leave us depressed. The paper details several concrete, evidence-based interventions that different organizations are currently testing to dismantle these structures. Let's dig into how institutions are trying to break the wheel.
There is definitely movement on multiple fronts. One of the first areas being targeted is the darkness of the review process itself. We are seeing the American Psychological Association take a lead on transparent governance.
What does that look like in practice?
They are starting to publish detailed demographic data about who is actually getting published, who is getting rejected, and they are mandating bias training for editorial boards. It's about forcing procedural fairness out into the open so the disparities can't be hidden anymore.
Sunlight being the best disinfectant.
Yeah.
But transparency only goes so far if the elites still control the networks. How do you actually break up those dense, exclusive VIP networks that hoard all the resources?
The Max Planck Society in Germany has a brilliant approach to network disruption. Through their independent research groups program, they bypass the gatekeepers entirely.
Really? How?
They provide massive direct funding and infrastructure specifically to early career researchers.
Oh, so they don't have to rely on an elite senior author to get access to data or funding?
Correct. It allows young scholars to build their own independent networks and pursue their own theoretical frameworks without having to beg for scraps or mimic the established elites.
I love that. You basically fund a rival nightclub right across the street.
Yeah.
But what about the journals themselves? Are any of them changing how they judge the work?
Some are focusing heavily on procedural justice. A prominent journal called Organization Science recently launched a methodological diversity initiative. They explicitly changed their review criteria to value qualitative and critical research, actively fighting back against the entrenched bias that insists only traditional quantitative data is valid.
That's huge.
Yeah, they are formally instructing their reviewers to stop rejecting novel methodologies.
So they are telling the bouncers to let different kinds of dancers into the club.
Exactly.
But there is also the issue of those labor advantages. The fact that elite researchers have grad students to do the heavy lifting while non-elite researchers are grading papers all night. How is anyone leveling that playing field?
The National Science Foundation in the U.S. is tackling resource distribution through a program called REU. This program connects undergraduate researchers with faculty outside of just the elite institutions.
Well, that's smart.
By distributing the labor pool of eager young researchers more equitably, they give non-elite faculty the actual capacity and manpower to conduct large-scale, ambitious research.
Okay, so we have transparency, network disruption, new review criteria, and labor redistribution. But perhaps the most radical intervention Dr. Westover mentions is evaluation reform. Because if the core disease is journalist fetishism, how do you cure an entire industry's obsession with metrics?
Well, you eliminate the metric entirely. Utrecht University in the Netherlands made international headlines when they completely eliminated journal rankings from their formal faculty evaluations and promotion decisions.
Wait, I have to ask about the practical reality of that. If Utrecht University completely eliminates rankings, don't they lose their standing on the global stage? Like, how do they prove to international funding boards that they are still a top-tier research institution if they refuse to play the metrics game?
It was a highly controversial move that faced a lot of skepticism for exactly that reason. But Utrecht shifted to narrative evaluations. Instead of a promotion committee counting how many elite journals a researcher published in, the researcher is asked to write a detailed narrative explaining the actual significance, the societal impact, and the intellectual depth of their work.
Wow, they actually have to read it.
Yes, the committee is forced to actually read the work and assess its value, rather than outsourcing their judgment to a journal's logo. And by doing this, Utrecht is betting that producing genuinely impactful research will ultimately attract more funding and prestige than simply optimizing for publications.
So what does this all mean? When you look at these interventions together, from the Max Planck Society to Utrecht University, it seems like these institutions are trying to force a massive systemic recalibration.
Yeah, the paper calls it a recalibration of the psychological contract.
Right. They are trying to move the whole academic world away from this frantic, individual metric chasing and steer it back toward what science is actually supposed to be: sustained inquiry, genuine curiosity, and collaborative mentorship.
The ultimate goal of all these interventions is something Dr. Westover calls epistemic pluralism. True equity doesn't just mean ensuring the author photo looks diverse. It means structurally recognizing that different paradigms, different methods, and different theoretical traditions all produce valuable knowledge. And to protect that pluralism long term, the paper argues we need distributed governance, things like rotating editorial boards and term limits, so that no single network can ever permanently hoard power again.
Because, as the data so clearly shows, diversity without equity is insufficient. If you just sprinkle a few new faces from different backgrounds into the exact same broken, hyper-competitive system, nothing actually changes.
Right. The people might look different, but the ideas remain static.
The systems that create and validate human knowledge need massive structural overhauls, not just representational band-aids.
This raises an important question for you, the listener, as you go about your week. We've spent this time talking about journalist fetishism in the highly specific world of academia, but consider how that dynamic parallels the metrics of success in your own industry, your own company, or your own workplace.
That's a really good point.
Are you and your organization actually optimizing for true value, critical thinking, and innovation? Or are you just optimizing for the metric that happens to look best on a quarterly report?
It is remarkably easy to get so caught up playing the game that you completely forget why the game exists in the first place. I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on today. If the science shaping our modern world, how we work, how we lead, how we build our society, has been filtered through a tiny, closed-loop network of elites standing outside that same exclusive nightclub for the last 60 years, what world-changing disruptive ideas have we already missed out on simply because they didn't fit the bouncer's paradigm?